There comes a point when Joshua, out of what seems like frustration, asked the people, "How long will you fail to take possession?" Now, they had been on the world's craziest journey, that God had taken them through the wilderness, and He had led them and He had provided for them. And while they didn't always understand everything about the journey, it was obvious, like God led them, that all you had to do is look out your tent. During the day, He was a pillar of smoke, and at night, a pillar of fire. It was comforting that God is right there, but it didn't require a whole lot of maturity, because again, all you had to do is peek out. And if it was there, you could relax. And if He was moving, if that pillar was moving, it was time for you to get moving. So you had to be a follower, but it didn't require a whole lot of personal responsibility. In the same way on provision, God met their every need. It was right there. You literally walked out your tent and it was waiting for you. You just had to pick it up. That was the degree of responsibility required. God led them and He met their every need. And He had amazing promises for them about the land of promise where there were greater blessings. But when they went into that land of promise, the relationship changed profoundly. Again, up until that point, God and His provision, everything He was doing was obvious. Now, not so much. And it required them to shift from being followers to seekers. Why do I say that? As soon as they moved into the promised land, the pillar of smoke and pillar of fire was gone. God was still moving. He was still desiring to lead and direct them, but He was less obvious. And it required that personal responsibility, personal initiative to seek God out. As Joshua said to the people as they were coming in, he challenged them to follow closely behind the ark, that representation of God's presence, because they had never been this way before. You want to pursue God. You don't want to miss Him. And God was still providing, but in a different form. Where again, before you just opened the tent and it was waiting for you. Just didn't require a whole lot of effort. Now God has better provision, better blessings that He's provided, but it required them to go get them. What does that have to do with you and I? Well, just like Joshua challenged the people, because so many were, even though they had seen God provide, give them great victories, they were really comfortable with what there was rather than pursuing all that was available. And it was a different type of relationship. And a handful, Joshua, Caleb, and others, they had that desire to pursue God and get all that He had. And so for you and I, again, how does that relate? It's that recognition of the need for our relationship to continue to grow. That when you first are in relationship with God, that you start out as just a simple follower. And when it comes to the amazing, God's promises, well, God is all powerful, all knowing, all everything, all encompassing. As He said to Moses, I am, which is, I'm everything. So when you come to Christ, when you first start that relationship, there's this expectation that God is all powerful, all knowing. He knows what I need, and this waiting for God to move. And that causes us to so often try to evaluate God's will by circumstances. And when we don't see the results we hope for, the conclusion often is it must not have been God's will. But here's the reality, that God does desire to provide, and He does so through His promises, but He also desires to lead. But it's a whole different relationship. He desires. That God desires more than followers. He desires those pursuers, those seekers. That what you find is when you first are in that relationship with God, He will, by His grace, often do the amazing. But then as we begin to mature, and one of the reasons we see so many Christians who are passive, that are spectators, that they just don't see. They believe God for heaven. They believe that the sacrifice of Jesus took care of all of their sins. And they believe in good deeds, trying to show the love of Christ to the world through their nice effort. But isn't there more? That as Paul said, the kingdom of God is not mere words, but of power. And God, in His unbelievable depths of love, that He paid this amazing sacrifice, not just to reunite us in relationship, but to restore this amazing plan where He delegated the responsibility for all of creation to Adam. And He knew Adam would blow it and give that up. But God's in the restoration business, and He wants His people to be more than followers. That He wants to reestablish that responsibility and the authority that He's delegated to you and I, the responsibility and authority through His promises to bring real transformation, more than just good deeds, but to see His power released on the earth. But it requires, again, that different relationship. Just like they went into the promised land, that it required seeking God's presence to get that direction, to get the victories, to get everything that was needed. The initiative lay with God's people. But so often, we just go through the motions, as so many of the people, when Joshua challenged them, how long will you fail to take possession? And more than that, God continues to provide, to do the amazing, to do the miraculous. But again, in that growing maturity, He's delegated the approach and the responsibility to you and I. And He's done it through His promises. So the point really comes full circle. It's that recognition of a need for a growing, increasing, profound relationship with God, but also the recognition that as we move from children to true heirs of the kingdom, as we move from children to the sons and daughters of the living God, that it's the fact that God is delegating the responsibility to you and I, and He's cheering us on, and we have to take up that mantle. We have to be the ones to recognize in an increasing confidence that it's God's direction, God's leading, God's will, that He would give us the victory as we step out in faith, relying on His promises and His leading. That it's time for you and I to begin to develop a whole different relationship with God. That in His infinite wisdom and infinite love, God called you and I not just to be in relationship with Him, but to be those heroes of the faith that would accept that mantle of leadership, that as profoundly bold as that is, that He is calling you to greater depths of responsibility, authority, and leadership through the relationship with Jesus Christ.